The kitchen smelled like burnt sugar and fear. I stood there, hands trembling over the counter, staring at the cake that had been sitting in the fridge like a ticking time bomb. My grandson, little wide-eyed Elijah, held out a tiny vial of something glowing faintly in the dim light. "This is the antidote, Grandma," he said, voice firm, as if he were older than his 7 years. "If you don't believe Dad tampered with the cake, eat it and use this afterward." I froze. The cake was Dad's masterpiece, or maybe his trap. A birthday tradition turned into a minefield of doubt. I could smell the sweetness, the butter, the hint of vanilla, but something bitter lingered beneath it, something I couldn't quite name. Elijah's hand shook slightly as he pressed the vial closer to me. "I'm not lying. You need to be careful." I swallowed hard, tasting the dry lump of fear in my throat. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, corners shadowed, the refrigerator humming like a warning. My mind raced through every memory of Dad, his charm, his sudden disappearances, the little cruel jokes he thought were funny. Could he really have poisoned this cake? Elijah's eyes met mine, steady and bright. "You have to decide, Grandma. Do you trust me or not?" And just like that, the world narrowed to two impossible choices: eat and risk, or don't eat and always wonder. I picked up the fork, my fingers slick with sweat. Elijah hovered beside me, small hand brushing mine, a lifeline in the storm of my doubts. The cake glimmered under the kitchen light, deceptively innocent, soft layers stacked high, frosting perfectly smooth, little sugar flowers that Dad had painstakingly placed. I remembered all the birthdays we'd shared, laughter echoing in this very kitchen, and part of me ached for normalcy. But the other part screamed, "Trust no one." My heart thudded against my ribs, every beat a warning. I took a breath and cut a small piece. The moment the fork touched my lips, time slowed. The cake was rich, velvety, a sweet trap that seemed to whisper, "Nothing is wrong." And yet, something lingered at the back of my throat, an odd metallic tang that made me pause. Elijah leaned closer. "Now?" His voice trembled just slightly. I nodded. He handed me the tiny vial. The liquid shimmered, almost hypnotic, like it knew secrets I didn't. My hand shook as I uncorked it. I poured it down in one gulp. Heat surged through me, sharp, burning, then fading into calm. For the first time, I felt in control. I could still taste the cake, but the fear that had knotted my stomach began to untangle. Elijah smiled, relief washing over his face like sunlight through storm clouds. "See?" he whispered. "You're safe now." But as I set the empty vial down, I noticed Dad's car pull into the driveway. The familiar rumble of his engine made my stomach drop. He was home earlier than expected, and he was smiling. Too much. I realized then that the real test hadn't been the cake. It was what came next. Dad walked through the door, humming a cheerful tune, carrying a grocery bag that smelled faintly of chocolate and something sharp, almost antiseptic. His eyes met mine, warm on the surface but calculating underneath. Elijah ducked behind my legs, peeking out like a tiny sentinel. "Hey, Mom," Dad said, setting the bag down with a casual grace. "I thought I'd surprise you with a little extra for your birthday. I know how you love dessert." His smile stretched too wide, too rehearsed, and I felt the old unease prick at my skin. I kept my hands folded over the counter, forcing calm. "Thanks," I said, voice steady, eyes locked on his. "I already had some cake, though, delicious." He laughed, a little too loudly, as if trying to convince himself of something. "Oh, did you now? Well, I suppose that's fine. Can't have too much sweetness in one day." Elijah tugged my sleeve. "Grandma, he's acting weird." I nodded subtly, my mind racing. Every little gesture, every inflection mattered. He'd always been charming, the kind of man who could twist words until the truth hid under layers of honey. But today, I wasn't a child anymore. Today I had Elijah's antidote, my instincts, and a determination I hadn't felt in years. Dad moved closer, peering over the counter as if he could read my thoughts. "You look tense. Did something happen?" I let a slow, calm smile curl across my lips. Maybe I'm just sensitive to unexpected surprises, I said, voice soft but edged with steel. I glanced at Elijah. He straightened, courage blooming in his small frame. And in that moment I realized the cake, the vial, the fear, they were all part of a bigger game, a test I was no longer willing to lose. I watched Dad as he moved toward the living room, every step measured, every smile a challenge. Elijah stayed close, fingers gripping mine like anchors in a storm. I knew I had to act carefully. One wrong move and everything could spiral. "Why don't you sit?" I said, voice calm, almost inviting. Dad paused, eyebrow raised. I could see the flicker of suspicion, but he masked it with that practiced grin. As he settled onto the couch, I reached for the plate with the remaining cake. I cut a small piece and placed it on a napkin, sliding it toward him. "Try this," I said lightly. "I think you'll like it." His eyes narrowed for just a heartbeat. Then he leaned in, taking the bite with exaggerated politeness. I held my breath, waiting, watching. The tension sickened like syrup in the air. And then he smiled, genuine for just a moment, and swallowed. I felt a surge of relief, tempered by wariness. Dad always had layers, but something had shifted. The fear that had clung to me for decades, the subtle, relentless anxiety around him, started to loosen. Elijah whispered, "Did it work?" I nodded, my hand brushing his hair. "For now, but we have to stay sharp." Dad leaned back, oblivious to our silent victory. He thought he was in control. Little did he know, the real power wasn't in the cake, or the prank, or even the fear he cultivated. It was in trust, in preparation, and in the bond between grandmother and grandson. For the first time that day, I felt the thrill of being 2 steps ahead. Dad lingered in the living room longer than expected, pretending to read a magazine, but tossing sideways glances at me and Elijah every few seconds. The faint scent of chocolate clung to his hands, but underneath it was that metallic undertone I had smelled in the cake earlier. My instincts screamed that he was testing us, seeing if fear still had a grip on me. Elijah sat on the floor, legs crossed, quietly sketching something in his little notebook. Occasionally he looked up at me, eyes shining with the kind of wisdom only a child forced to grow up quickly can have. I smiled softly at him. He was braver than most adults I knew. "Mom," Dad said finally, closing the magazine with a snap, "are you sure you didn't taste anything unusual?" His tone was casual, too casual, like a man trying to plant doubt. I tilted my head, pretending to consider. Maybe a hint of something bitter, but it was fine. Sweet as always. My words were calm, measured, but inside my heart was racing. He chuckled, leaning back, and I caught a flicker of unease in his eyes. He thought he cornered me, but the truth was I was observing him, reading his tells, the subtle tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers drummed the armrest, every gesture a breadcrumb. And I realized that Elijah had seen it too. The boy whispered, barely audible, "Grandma, he's worried. He knows we're onto him." I nodded, my hand brushing his hair, giving him silent permission to trust the plan. We weren't just surviving, we were strategizing, quietly orchestrating a way to turn the tables. Dad reached for the remote, glancing at the kitchen. "Did you save any of that cake for later? You know, to enjoy after dinner?" I smiled, sharp and calm. "Oh, I think we've had enough sweetness for one day." My eyes met Elijah's, and he grinned just slightly. Our secret signal. The tension shifted in the room, subtle but electric. He noticed it. The way we moved, the quiet confidence, the invisible thread of trust between us. It unsettled him. For the first time in years, he didn't have the upper hand, and I felt it. That delicious rush of control, the quiet triumph of being prepared, of protecting the ones I loved. Dad's grin faltered and he cleared his throat, pretending to cough. "Well, maybe I'll just finish it myself later." His voice had lost some of its ease. I knew he'd feel the sting of defeat slowly, privately, as he realized the cake, the test, the fear. It all backfired. Elijah leaned against my leg, whispering, "We did it, Grandma." I kissed the top of his head. whispering back, "We did more than that. We survived, and we won." Dad didn't leave the living room that evening. Instead, he hovered, pacing just enough to be noticed, trying to appear casual while every movement betrayed his tension. The house smelled faintly of the cake and the antiseptic tang lingering on his hands, a silent reminder of the day's events. Elijah and I sat side by side on the couch, a quiet fortress of calm. The boy's small hand gripped mine under the blanket, steadying me even as my pulse raced. I knew Dad was sizing us up, trying to predict our next move, testing if fear still ruled me. But for the first time, I felt truly untouchable. He finally spoke, leaning against the doorway, eyes flicking between us. "So, what are your plans for the rest of the evening? Maybe a little dessert competition, for fun." His words were sugar-coated, but I tasted the suspicion behind them. I smiled, slow and deliberate. "No, we're good. Maybe later. Right, Elijah?" The boy nodded, eyes bright with silent agreement. I could feel his courage bolstering mine. Dad's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. He took a slow breath, as if weighing words, then said, Sometimes I just like to see how far I can push things, just to know who's really in control." That was it. That little confession was the chink in his armor. My mind clicked into place. I leaned forward, voice calm but edged with authority. "Well, Dad, you've tested us. You've pushed. But control isn't about fear or games. It's about trust and respect, something you seem to forget." He flinched almost imperceptibly, the words landing sharper than any argument could. Elijah squeezed my hand, and I let him see the flash of pride in my eyes. I stood and moved to the counter, reaching for the small plate with the leftover cake. "You think you had the upper hand with a little trick, but we saw it coming. And now the only question is, what are you going to do next?" Dad looked at the plate, then at us. His carefully curated smile wavered. He realized in that moment he had lost, not in a loud confrontation, but quietly, subtly, to the calm, deliberate force of preparedness and connection between grandmother and grandson. He took a step back. Maybe I underestimated you too." I nodded, setting the plate down and placing a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "Underestimating us is a mistake you won't make again, and that's the last test for today." For the first time, Dad didn't argue. He didn't try to reclaim the narrative. He just watched, restrained, while I felt a deep, satisfying release. The victory wasn't loud, but it was absolute. Elijah whispered, a grin tugging at his lips, "We actually did it, Grandma. We won." I pulled him close, holding him tight, inhaling the faint scent of chocolate and sugar that still lingered in the air. "Yes," I said softly, "and nothing can take this from us." The house finally quieted, the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock filling the spaces Dad's presence had once dominated. Elijah and I sat together on the couch, shoulders touching, savoring the calm after the storm. The tension in my chest slowly loosened, replaced by a warm, steady pulse of relief and pride. Dad retreated to his study, closing the door softly but firmly behind him. I could hear the faint shuffle of papers, the low murmur of a man wrestling with his own missteps. I didn't need to eavesdrop. I could sense the shift. He was realizing in his own private way that his games had failed, that for once he hadn't controlled the outcome. Elijah rested his head against my arm, his small hand clutching mine. "Grandma, did we really scare him?" His voice held awe and just a touch of amusement. I chuckled softly, stroking his hair. "No, baby, we didn't scare him. We made him understand. That's much better than fear. That's respect, and respect can't be faked." He looked up at me, eyes wide and thoughtful. "So, we won, and it didn't even feel mean." "No," I said, smiling. "We won because we were smart, because we were careful, and because we stayed together." Elijah beamed, leaning closer as if the truce of the day was a secret treasure we shared. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the quiet seep into my bones. The fear, the doubt, the tension, they were all behind us now. We'd faced it, anticipated it, and emerged stronger. From the study, I could hear Dad quietly muttering to himself. I didn't need to know his exact words. The lesson had been learned. He had been reminded gently but firmly that power isn't taken through fear or manipulation. It's earned through trust and honesty. And today, he had lost that silent war. I looked down at Elijah and smiled, brushing his curls from his forehead. "You know," I whispered, "sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't fight loudly. It's prepare quietly, protect the people you love, and show strength when it matters most." Elijah nodded solemnly, then grinned. "Can we have cake tomorrow, Grandma? Real cake." I laughed, warmth spilling over me. "Yes, baby, real cake, no tricks, just sweetness, and maybe a little chocolate for good measure." And for the first time in years, I felt the peace of home truly restored. The kind of calm that comes from knowing you've faced the storm and come out unshaken together. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the kitchen windows, warm and golden, chasing away the shadows of yesterday. Elijah bounded in, hair messy, eyes bright, already talking a mile a minute about superheroes and breakfast pancakes. I laughed, shaking my head at his energy, and felt a lightness I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Dad appeared in the doorway, hands tucked into his pockets. He looked different, softer, smaller somehow, like the tension that had filled the house had finally lifted. He cleared his throat, not trying to charm or manipulate, just present. "Good morning," he said quietly, avoiding his usual flourish. I thought I'd make amends. I know yesterday was a lot." I nodded, holding Elijah close as he chattered about syrup and blueberries. "Thank you," I said calmly. "Acknowledging it is a good start, and we're all ready to move forward." Dad gave a small, sincere smile and stepped aside, letting us take the lead. Elijah ran to the counter, eyes sparkling, and I followed, pulling out a fresh cake. This one was ours, safe, sweet, and completely free of fear or manipulation. Together we frosted it, added extra chocolate chips, and laughed as Elijah sneakily licked the spatula. When the first bite was finally shared, it wasn't just cake that we tasted. It was trust, victory, and the quiet triumph of knowing we had faced deception, fear, and control, and had come through unshaken. Elijah leaned against me, sticky fingers and all, and whispered, "We really did it, Grandma. We won together." I kissed the top of his head, heart full. "Yes, baby, we did." And nothing, not fear, not tricks, not anyone, can take this from us. Today we decide what family means, and we choose love, honesty, and courage. Dad watched us, the tension completely gone from his posture. I could see the realization in his eyes. The lessons were learned, the balance restored, and for the first time in a long while, the house felt like a home, not a battlefield. Elijah laughed, crumbs falling onto the table, and I laughed with him. The sweetness of the moment lingered longer than any cake ever could, a lasting reminder that courage, preparation, and love had won the day. And in that warm morning light, I knew we had turned a test, a trap, into a triumph. Not just mine or Elijah's, but ours. Together, unstoppable, unshaken, and fully alive.